Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So, um, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Then to this LARRI webinar on what's hot and what's not in land rights research, editor perspectives. And we have two guests who I'd like to welcome. Professor Praveen Jha of Jawaharlal Nehru University in India, who's the editor of Agrarian South, Journal of Political Economy. And also to Professor Hossein Azadi, who's section editor-in-chief of Land and editorial board member of Land Use Policy and Land Degradation and Development. So, in other words, we're getting 4 for the price of 2. So we're very happy to be able to invite both Praveen and Hossein to join us today. We will proceed roughly as we normally do. So we'll have a couple of presentations to begin with, and then we'll open up for questions. We probably won't take a break between the presentations and the discussion. Although if anybody thinks that we should, then they're welcome to prompt me. What we've asked both Praveen and Hossein to talk to us about then is based on their experience in their journals, what they are finding is trending within land rights research, within the submissions that they're getting and within what they're publishing, and what things they feel that possibly should be on the agenda that maybe aren't. In both cases, I think it would be interesting for us if before you before you share those insights and opinions with us, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourselves, and how you've become engaged in land rights research and in the journals where you're working. And by all means, take the opportunity to tell us a little bit about the journals if you feel that we might not be sufficiently familiar. We haven't discussed running order, but if I ask Praveen to begin.
Sure. I hope you can hear me, all of you. Great. So, Robin, thank you for inviting me to this conversation. And there is great value in talking about something which is extremely foundational in much of the global south. Of course, it goes well beyond global south in a historical sense, the question of land rights. Now, in terms of the trajectories of economic transformation, structural transformation, if there is one thing which I consider far more foundational than anything else, that is land. Of course, along with land, then we have to get into a number of other questions and so on. I'll come to some of those issues later, but a few words about where I come from. I started my academic journey as a faculty member some 40 years ago. I was, to begin with, at Delhi University in India, Delhi, um, for about a decade or so, and then shifted to Jawaharlal Nehru University, from where I have just superannuated in January 26, after my more than close to, more than four decades of being on the faculty there, in these two institutions and so on. So land and labor have been among my two most prominent interests, and the significance of land in overall structural transformation, economic transformation, has been an abiding concern for me all through. Right? I have also been a member of several networks globally, and one of these is known as Agrarian South Network, which was started more than 2 decades ago, and it was headquartered in Zimbabwe, courtesy someone who is no more, late Professor Sam Moyo. Sam was a founder of basically this institute, which was in Harare, uh, looking at the land question. And we became friends at some point, and then finally, kind of, that we decided to set up a network and then a journal, and then we started the journal in 2011, which is registered in India because of some technical reasons. We need not get into some of those details, but basically, this journal focuses very prominently on the question of land rights, the role of land in agrarian transformation, and so on in Global South, that is across 3 continents. Incidentally, this journal is probably unique in the sense of being only tricontinental journal in its functioning where the editors, the advisory board, the contributors, and each issue has at least a piece from one of the 3 continents, Asia, Africa, or Latin America. Right? Sort of, that is something that we were very keen on, and that has worked very well thus far. So the journal has had 15 years of its life already, and sort of has established itself as a reasonable voice on the land question and everything that connects with land. So that is about the journal. Now, in terms of the topic itself, as I said, the centrality of land in structural transformation is something which we feel very strongly about for reasons of whatever we would consider a meaningful trajectory of economic development. For that, if land rights are ignored, then essentially we get lost in pretty meaningless kind of development trajectories. What do I mean by meaningless trajectories? Fundamentally, the needs of the bottom half gets bypassed. The needs of what you would consider economic and social justice for the bottom half gets trampled upon, gets thrown out of the window, and so on. And this I'm saying on the basis of our research across continents. And when I say across continents, I'm also talking of Europe. Historically speaking, how that had played a very, very important role, or how that had played a very important role in North America. So, we, based on our research, are completely convinced about either historically speaking or in contemporary times, the significance of land rights. And when we speak of land rights, it is land rights not only in rural areas for cultivation, but also in urban spaces, also use and entitlement of land for non-cultivation purposes. There are multiple things which are associated with that. So I do not know how much time you want to give me, Robin, on elaborating.
Just 10 to 15 minutes to begin with, and then there'll be time for questions and discussion. So there'll be much more time after that. But
Sure. Okay. So I've already taken 5 minutes, so another maybe 5 to 7 minutes or so. Yeah. So, if we are looking at, let's say, relatively more recent experiences, let's say after the Second World War, and if you're talking about the trajectories of very, very robust economic transformation, right? Now, which are the cases that come to our mind? The well-known so-called East Asian cases. Look at, let's say, Japan, look at South Korea, look at Taiwan, and so on. Yeah. coming from very different kinds of historical backgrounds. And these are, some of you will recall the 91 report of the World Bank, which was basically gloating over the collapse of Soviet Union and socialism as a model, and basically saying that finally the markets have won, right? Basically, World Bank was told, please wait. Look at our history a little more carefully. And who had gone to the World Bank to say this? Japan and South Korea. They said, let us have yet another report getting into the nitty-gritty of our journeys, right? And that was the so-called 1993 East Asian Miracle Report, which basically puts its finger on the centrality of land rights and land reforms. And then, based on that foundation, a number of things. Yeah. So how? In East Asian cases, 6 out of, the 8 countries were identified. So if you forget about Hong Kong and Singapore, which are more of port cities, trading routes, and so on, the remaining 6, 35 to 45% of all cultivable land was redistributed. Now, it's a most remarkable kind of story. Yeah. So Chiang Kai-shek, who runs away from mainland China, goes to Taiwan, who had been a huge opponent of any land redistribution to begin with. What is the first thing that he does in Taiwan? Massive land redistribution, right? And it's not only land redistribution, but coupled with land redistribution, very focused and careful attention on how do you improve the productivity of agriculture, how do you improve the management of agriculture along with land redistribution, right? And that is considered by most scholars. In fact, I have rarely come across any exception to this particular claim which I'm making, that was the foundation of their remarkable journey. Yeah, of all these countries which came to be known as the miracle cases, right? Of course, then they move on in 2 decades or so to become leaders in a whole range of other activities. I would argue that similar things have happened even in the Western world, Northern world. If you look at their own histories, if you look at the successful stories there, many of these countries, sort of out of some 45 odd countries that we define as global north, right? You would find that very, very powerful instances of careful attention to land rights and land management was something that indeed was pretty central to their journey. So that's one obvious kind of story, one obvious kind of message that we get historically. Now, compare that with many countries in Global South, what we talked about with respect to East Asia, or some of the countries in the Global North. Look at India, for instance. One of the biggest countries, population-wise, as you know, it has almost overtaken China now. Yeah. And what was the total distribution of cultivable land in India over a period of 50 years? We started talking about it in 1940s. Yeah. In fact, we started talking about it even well before that, but certainly in terms of drawing up policy sketches and so on, from 1940s onwards, total redistribution about 2 to 3%. 40% in East Asia, 35 to 44%. And here we are talking of 2 to 3%. Look at persistence of mass poverty. Countries where you do not have significant access to land, decent land rights, etc., what happens? Basically, you have a massive ejection of population from rural areas. They became floaters all over with most vulnerable kinds of identities, right? Apart from that, the other issue which we should, in my first set of remarks, I would certainly want to highlight is the question of different social categories which we need to pay very serious attention to. So, for instance, land rights for women, yeah, or land rights for, let's say, uh, socially marginalized categories. And in a country like India, for instance, you have, sort of those groups which have happened to be at the bottom of the ladder in ways which are extremely unfortunate. Before independence, many of them were not part of even the social and economic hierarchy in a manner where you could have conversation with them, where you shied away from their shadows. If any of you are familiar with some of the India's cultural and political history and so on, you have the categories called untouchables, right? Or Dalits, whose shadows would defile you. Historically speaking, that is how they were treated, right? In fact, it was such a terrible kind of, sort of social, cultural, political, economic division that Elizabeth Wilkerson uses the idea of caste, to in fact look at what happened in the US. The book is called Caste, right? Which is talking about caste hierarchies and those who were completely messed up in every which way that you can imagine, right? So she equates the hierarchies of multiple kinds, and in the case of North America, this whole question of race, yeah, as caste, because that is a much more oppressive kind of mold that we are talking about, and in her formulation, that works very well in terms of understanding hierarchies and so on, right? So, the question of particular social categories, the question of gender in particular, and so on. So, if you are interested in the well-being of many of these, which socially, culturally have been down the ladder in that hierarchy, yeah, and there is no running away from addressing the land question. Beena Agrawal, a very well-known political economist from India, yeah, in fact, wrote a book which became very well-known, which was basically on land rights for women, a field of her own. Yeah. Now, that was making a very strong case that if you want well-being of women, give them land and support them to do their own agriculture, right? So, to conclude, I would say that in my assessment of the existing literature, my own work over several decades now, more than 4 decades now, possibly nothing is more important than the land question. But let's not reduce land question to some very narrow mechanistic thing, not simply giving a plot of land, but then how to ensure viability of the activities that we associate with land. We should not limit it only to sort of so-called rural spaces. You think of many in Africa who are doing, sort of peri-urban kind of farming, and then if they get rights, lives are transformed. So, Robin, let me stop there, and then if you want to bring in into the conversation again, I would be very happy to do so. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And Yeah, I almost feel a sense of guilt. Even when I was presenting this, opening the webinar, I mentioned land administration and land governance. I didn't mention land redistribution, which would have been such a central idea to the idea of land reform under so much of history. Yet I wonder how often in our LARRI webinars we've actually discussed land redistribution as an issue. It's I think you could strongly argue that's something that's not hot in a lot of the work we've been discussing. So thank you very much for that. And we will certainly be coming back to you. But now I'd like to hand over to Professor Hossein Azadi for his inputs. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Robin, for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here. In fact, I didn't know about this workshop, if we call it workshop, or I'm very happy to be here and, in fact, learn, because we already shared this with a couple of my colleagues that something like this is running. So thank you. Just to introduce myself, I'm a professor at the University of Ghent in Belgium, Department of Geography. And yeah, my major focus has been in the Global South too. I will explain soon. But I've got 2 PhDs. My first PhD is in agriculture, economics, and rural development, and the second in human geography. In both PhDs, I have been focusing on land. First one, in fact, I was focusing on rangeland, and the second, majorly at the, let's say, agricultural land conversion. But both, in fact, I have been focusing on the land users. So this means that, okay, that is the route how I've got closer and closer to land right and later land governance. And then thanks to the many reviews I did for these journals and the publication I made to these journals, then I was asked to become a member of editorial board and section editor-in-chief. And then since then, we have been focusing on, of course, majorly on socio-economic and political aspects of land use. That's a little bit of history. And yeah, coming back to your question, what is hot? In fact, I was also thinking, what could hot mean? So in my perspective, we can say that there are 2 things when we think about what a hot topic could be. People, what we have experienced so far at the editorial board, have been discussing 2 different things when it comes to hot topics. I see some colleagues, they are very fan of fashion. And then when an issue comes like a fashionable issue, they call it hot topic. For example, nowadays, you see that we are using AIs and how we can, for example, use this AI in land issues, land governance. I get back to that as well. So from one aspect, you can say a hot topic could be something that people get busy with, and it comes and it goes, I mean. Or sometimes everyone gets busy, a lot of publications, a lot of discussion, events, and then after some time, it's like a dress that is not anymore of interest of people. Of course, I'm not a fan of that, although I'm working on that a little bit. But another meaning of hot could be what really we need and will be more in our requests at the global level in the future. So what we have, in fact, maybe already experiencing before, but still is a lot on our plate. These are the things that I will discuss a little bit today. And then the second would be, when I discuss all this, I can say that, okay, what we are experiencing at different journals where I'm an editor board member, but also what my own personal opinion is about these, let's say, hot topics. In fact, I prepared a PowerPoint, if you don't mind. Can I share? Yeah.
Please do.
So, you should be able to see my screen, right? So I was already thinking how we can call all this and why I am more to land governance, because to my understanding, in terms of concepts, we have already elaborated a lot of terms and concepts. So more or less our vocabulary on land rights, land issues, I believe is quite rich. But when it comes to how, I mean, on the making, we still have a lot of problems. And there I would discuss land governance. So the governance, how we are going to make, for example, a more fair, let's say, land rights or whatever we have as an issue, for example, like land conflict. For example, many people discuss how we can shift or move from land conflict to land dialogue. Okay, we all know that we should be avoiding conflict and going to dialogue, but the major question is how. So to me, still a lot of work has remained on land governance, the governance aspect. That's why I'm more focusing on that today. And in fact, myself, that's my major focus of, let's say, research in all these journals. So I'm just, you know better than me, but just as a warm-up, climate change has made everything more important, of course. And these hot topics, in fact, now is more in need of everyone. Then we have recently energy transition, and the competition we have put more on land accordingly, and then carbon markets and nature-based solutions, but also like migration, conflict, and food insecurity, which I would mention that they belong more to the past, but still as a hot topic. And of course, urbanism and its pressure on land system. So having all this in mind, let's a little bit discuss all this in more detail. So when we say land conflict, by the way, I'm Persian. I come from Iran originally, although I left my home country since my first PhD, so already like 25 years I'm out. Nevertheless, I have been working not only with my home country, but also the Middle East. And like what I've been working like more than a decade in Ethiopia as a global South country. In fact, with another issue, as you know, perhaps it's more to land grabbing. Let me just remove that. So why I am saying that? Because I just wanted to give a kind of warm up about land conflict right now, like what we are experiencing, the war between the states and Iran and Israel, immediately comes to land conflict. To me, when you look at, at global level, when you look at the major wars historically so far, one important thing, almost I would say, or common thing, has been always land conflict, like what we have between Ukraine and Russia, what we have between Gaza and Israel, or wherever, even in Ethiopia, what we have like civil war. Still, you can see a lot of this land conflict. So to me, this hot topic, I repeat, this hot topic still remains as a hot topic because, as you see, we are still very much busy how to make a kind of compromise and shift from land conflict to land dialogue. For example, if you follow the news between Trump and Iranian politicians, they always talk about let's have a dialogue, let's talk. But at the end, what we see is more conflict. So to me, the conflict has been there and still is popping up. But why we cannot have a healthy dialogue remains all to, in fact, governance. So we still have a lot of problems in two things. First of all, and in our journals, by the way, we are promoting two things: the causes of this land conflict. So a series of studies, they have been focusing on the causes of this land conflict. And another series would be the impact, for example, the clash, the violence, like what we see, for example, right now. So, I mean, if I would mention what, again, if we can make it a little bit, dig it further, how we can consider the hot topic, even on a topic like land conflict, which is not that new, but we can still divide it to the causes and impacts, causes and effects. And this is still, in fact, we need to elaborate and conduct a lot of studies, because if we know the causes, we can better avoid the impacts in the future. But how, again, we come to the conflict, the governance issue. And then the clash over land has been another, let's say, new, not new, but at least I would say more escalating issue nowadays. The clash. This is serious clash right now, what we see. For example, when we talk about the Strait of Hormuz in Iran and this war, and how Iran is trying to control that, and accordingly has put a lot of pressure on the global energy input, output. This is, again, how we are going to govern all this. There are a lot of running discussion right now. But then one may question how we can convince, for example, both parties at the right, at the moment, it's not two parties anymore. You see that there are many, many parties. So shifting from, let's say, a kind of homo, or let's say mono stakeholder to multi-stakeholder is another topic, because the moment we go for multi-stakeholders, things get a lot more complicated. And when we say things, then accordingly, governance would be a lot more complicated. So the making, how we should make all this, will be a lot more complicated. So my conclusion so far would be that the traditional models of at least governance, when it comes to land governance, cannot in fact work that much. So we need to make new versions that can address this complexity. And I will discuss that soon. Let me just pass quicker. So I'm not going to repeat all this, because I think already somehow Professor Praveen already addressed some of these issues. So these are not the new one, but I mean, like what we see is still there. Political economy can help here, for example, to explain things, but still we need to make at the end to address how all this should happen. And then the other thing that we are discussing at a journal level is the concept of government and governance. And in another paper, in fact, what I'm working right now is that we have land governed, but not governing. This is another thing that, in fact, again, address this how and that making that is not, in fact, taking place. So again and again, my conclusion so far has been that in terms of concept, I believe we are having quite a good vocabulary, a good dictionary of land, let's say, right concepts and terms. But when it comes to the making, we are still in the beginning. Although, for example, if you look at Ostrom or others theories, you find a lot of literature, but conceptually, they can in fact make a good backup. But practically, when we go to the micro level, for example, when you discuss all this with farmers, or if you go to more regional or macro level, like what I just discussed about the war, running war right now in the Middle East, then still practically we cannot find that much of good experience and good making. So this is another thing what I really want to, if you ask me what the hot topic would be, how this governance aspect should be practiced, should be exercised. In a way, we always say it should be win-win situation, but it is not. Most of the cases we see one party is happy, the other not. And of course, this means the beginning of conflict. And at some point, even if we have to convince the other, like what we see, for example, in the Middle East, we go for force. So the governance is made through force. This is, to me, a big question, whether this is a good governance. Of course not. So if a governance should be made through force, this is not a governance. In fact, this is what we are experiencing, that we have land governed but not governing. Why? Because party is made out of force, not convincing people. So there is no dialogue. The dialogue, in fact, is a kind of what we are experiencing is a kind of forcing or threatening people that, okay, if you don't think of my wins, I will attack. We will make a clash. And this is not the meaning of governing, simply governance. So another topic to me that is very much of hot topic would be how we should distinguish between governance and governing functionally. And of course, if we have to make all this like having land dialogue, then, I mean, because we said we have to shift from land conflict to land dialogue, again, okay, this is nice, ideally perfect, but how? Again, the big question is there, and then let me just pass what we need to have a healthy, when I say healthy, which means win-win situation of land dialogue. This is another thing that is not that easy. Okay, as I mentioned, the big problem what we have, not problem, as an issue we have and we have to address is that we are having a lot of different parties. To have everyone happy is a big job. Is a lot of work. And then, of course, those governance questions like what, I always in my classes, I call them like WH questions, like what, who, when, where, to what extent should all this be made. The answer of all these WH question, in fact, makes our governance. But theoretically, we can answer all this, but when it comes the shifting from WH question to how, then we fail. And this is something that I would, in fact, invite, even when, for example, I receive a submission from some authors and I see that, okay, they are, in fact, if they are repeating things like conceptualizing this and that as a member of editorial board, I'm not that much of interest into those submissions. But if they say, okay, let's go for the making, how it should be made, then yes, then this is something very welcome to our journals. And of course, when we say from government to governance, then you have seen and you have heard we have a lot of different governance, let's say, systems from top down, very traditional, all the way you heard participatory, polycentric, adaptive, for example, networking. There are a lot of, let's say, different governance systems that we in fact try to mention how things are working. Nevertheless, what we in fact recently try to encourage is that, okay, not that one governance system in fact can be the answer. Myself, I'm working on the concept, already published this in Land Degradation and Development, on the concept of HYGOM, which means hybrid governance model. In this one, how at different levels, micro, meso, macro, we need the combination of different governance system or strategy, and at different levels, who should be involved? Who should be involved? This means that through HYGOM model, we are trying to say that what we had in the past in terms of governance aspect or how to make all this, in fact, we have a lot of, let's say, gaps. And if we can have different governance system at different levels, then definitely it can address our problems and our issues better than before. And of course, when it comes, look, I already, in the beginning of my talk, I already mentioned the new waves or the new fashion. For example, you see that there are people like myself also, partly busy with climate smart land governance, or some people go for AI, GIS, or let's say those digital tools. Some go for nature-based solution and all other topics. They are nice. I wouldn't say they are not nice, of course, but to me, most of these topics you hear like a decade, and then after a decade, you don't hear anymore. So my conclusion would be for this talk is that, okay, we should distinguish between something that is a serious problem. In my opinion, it's like what I discussed, the governance and how it should be made, the making. We should distinguish between that and something that is like a fashion. So coming back to the topic of this, let's say, workshop, what is hot and what is not hot, then to me, we should look at that from different perspectives. And yeah, there are things that you can always add. This is to me more fashionate. So you can say that, okay, we are using different tools, blah, blah, to address this and that. But then again, most of these tools, unfortunately, they don't work or they don't function efficiently in the global south. Most of them are made in the global north and they work very well in there. But when we go to the complex situation of the global south, then in fact we need to change our approach from, let's say, technology-oriented tools for governing all this to more, I would say, governance and human aspects of, let's say, global land governance. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Hossein. I think with a topic like what's hot and what's not, we might have been expecting to be following the trends. And I think both of you have kind of sent us back to some very fundamental issues and some painful issues. I think it's yes. sobering to think in terms of where land governance might be going in different places at the moment, in the different places we're engaged in. I'll resist the temptation to start talking about Cambodia now, and instead open up the floor. You're welcome, all of you, to either raise a digital hand, you can raise an actual hand, you can write something in the chat. I've just got Margareta sadly having to leave us in the chat there. So any comments or questions? Marlin?
Thanks a lot for the presentations and the many good ideas. I was just kind of starting to, let's see if I can gather my thoughts. I was kind of starting to spin off in relation to the last presentation. I think I have maybe two, maybe three comments. The first one is about the how question that you, Hossein, is asking. I was thinking, for example, I saw one of the slides we're talking about stakeholder dialogue and so on. I'm just thinking when it comes to land conflicts and conflicts in general, there is a lot about those kind of things in the so-called gray literature, right? So I was just going to think about, I was just going to ask you to say something about whether that the problem is a kind of lack of communication between the academic literature and the more practice-oriented literature, which is actually grasping a lot more with the how question. And there is a lot of publications out there. So that was one question. Another one was in relation to these kind of models for land governance. I think it's great, and of course we as academics can come in with input to different kind of models. But as a political economist, I'm always getting back to okay, but what is actually politically possible? And what are the power and interest dynamics around those kind of solutions? So that was just two of my reflections. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. If I just can have a short answer. Look, in fact, we have had this discussion at Loop Land Use Policy Journal a lot, like this question, how we can reconcile between academia and policy makers. But look, when we say that was the conclusion, when we say land use policy, in fact, at some point, we have to face the two. I mean, on the one hand, we wish to reformulate policy in a, let's say, a scholarly way. That doesn't work. I totally agree with you. But then again, if we go and if we say that it has no science base or backup, it doesn't work too. So what we should do is, in fact, as I mentioned, you see that here we, in fact, we are facing the complexity of the issue. You are totally right. So in land, I've noticed based on the in land use policy, based on the editor-in-chief, the direction of the journal and the flavor sometimes go more to policy. It was like the founder of the journal, Professor Guy Robinson. He was a political economist. So majorly he was welcoming more, let's say, submissions that are more policy oriented. Then he was replaced by Professor Zaap Zevenberger from ITC Netherlands, and he was more to let's say science and let's say techniques, and then more to numbers. I would say even I could see that he was welcoming more submissions that they have more quantified analysis. while we know that the policy, in fact, may have or governance, it has a lot of, let's say, quality or qualifications that should be discussed and, in fact, hard to measure, as we know. So I'm just trying to tell you that in this journal, in fact, that's the key, how we should reconcile between all this. But one thing is clear, that to me, at least, the policy should be dominant because it's a lot policy oriented, but it should be supported by some technology. For example, if we say GIS, AI, for example, RS, remote sensing, all this technology and tools should be helping to make a better policy, not reverse. Because I see sometimes there are some policy made how to, let's say, work and spread all these, let's say, technologies even in the global south. A lot of money and investment, but at the end, it's apparently we forgot that this tool is just a tool for us to make a better governance or policy. So again and again, based on, the background of the people who come to the board, things might be a little bit different. And that's exactly what you correctly sensed so far. So this is something, and I forgot actually your second point. I don't remember again.
It was about the political economy around the governance models, right? We can think through a lot of models, but they are only implemented if those who are in power are kind of buying into it, and if it fits their interests and so on.
Yeah, in fact, this is exactly what I have been trying to address in my HIGOM model. At different levels. The more we go to the micro level, the more we get to, for example, farmers practice. The more we go to macro level, it's more to agenda making, policy making. So what I mean is that we need the hybrid model that can address all these. But so far, it has been like for example, if you remember Robert Chambers' idea, we said, okay, participatory, and he said, okay, put the first last, put the last first, and things like that. This was, to me, all this was just a kind of, let's say, more extreme points. Moving from one extreme, for example, scientists, to the other extreme, just consider farmers. So these extreme strategies, to me, they don't work. So in new models, what we have been trying to do, for example, we said the concept of living labs, how we have to make it together with farmers, how we can co-design together with the farmers. Then we need a new governance. And that new governance, to me, is a kind of hybrid that what we need. So again, from traditional, let's say one or let's say a couple of dominant governance system, I think we need to shift the kind of paradigm shift to more, let's say, hybrid model that could be very adaptive if we go to more to the micro level. And if we go to macro level, it should be more to the reflexive and networking. By the way, if you could have a look at the paper I recently published in Land Degradation and Development, I've been trying to explain all these ideas a lot better. Thank you.
Thank you, Hossein and Marlin. Juliana.
Thank you very much, Praveen and Hossein. Super interesting. What a privilege to hear directly from you. What do you think we should be looking at or not looking at or prioritizing? And I have a couple of questions. One, perhaps it's more to Hossein, like you speak about the centrality of policy, but also like many different areas that you see. This is more like fashion now. But I was wondering if you think that some of these areas, they can also be openings. And I'm thinking in specifically like the expansion of carbon credits now in Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, but also like apparently like also a very big interest now in biodiversity credits. And there's lots of people, at least in the policy domain, thinking that the way that these markets emerge now, especially through digital technologies, that may be a way also to strengthen land rights, because now things and relations become more transparent and more visible. I'm not saying I agree. I was just wondering what's your take on that? If some like that, focusing on the technique, could also be a means towards addressing these more fundamental problems such as land rights. And then I have a more like theoretical question that I see that especially Praveen speaks about transformation, and how like from the origins of the term, from like the Marxist origin of agrarian transformations, now like there's so like different ways of thinking now have in a sense reappropriated the term, and we use transformations not at all in the sense that this original sense, but in societal transformations, and pretty much like within the structures, how do we optimize and how do we overcome our problems without transforming. So I was thinking, like, if you have any, how do you reflect about that you still use the word transformation when it means so different things now, and also if you could reflect about, for me, something that long time ago I started thinking that how like the neo-Marxist tradition of agrarian transformation, what is expected to happen in that way of thinking, and how smallholders and like the movements of the South, I'm thinking of agroecological movements, of the movements of the Sem Terra in Brazil, that seems to be a contradiction there, that it's not about the land consolidation. It's like it's really about keeping small scale, and so on the opposite direction of what a more socialist oriented plan for the urban area would be. So if you could just reflect about this, what seems to be like these contradictions. Thank you.
You need to turn the mute off, Praveen.
No, I was suggesting that Hussein could go first, and then because Juliana has
Sure.
raised a very profound issue, and then I'll take that up after Hussein's point. Okay.
Look, what I was just in fact trying to say, because when Robin contacted me, he asked to share my experience as editor board member. So what we are noticing is when we receive a submission, then apparently the authors try to publish no matter what. They wish to publish, for example, and then they touch something that is very fashionable. Therefore, they try to say that, okay, our work is good, and then they try to publish that. It's like what I noticed recently also, if you look at the Nature Family journals, top tier journals. Of course, they are in fact indirectly encouraging people who touch new topics. But what is the new topic? More fashionable topics. But whether we really need that is another thing. So I've noticed even my students, they come to me saying that, okay, we wish to publish in that journal. Then they follow what the novel topic and more fashionable thing would be. But in fact, the research should be reversed. First, we should see what we need, and then see whether we can publish in the relevant journals. So I wish to let you guys distinguish between these two. When I say fashion, this means that, okay, we forget what the general goal of the research should be, whether it is coming from a real need or the real need is to publish. In fact, when the real need is to publish, for example, in Nature Family Journal, then you try your best to say that, okay, we address this and that, but whether this is something that in fact comes from your heart, that you really wish to address, and you feel that, okay, there is a serious issue there. Of course, the best would be to have both at the same time. I mean, something that is very novel and at the same time a real need. But I've noticed that many submissions, what we receive is like having a wave of, for example, especially recently, AI. How to use AI here, how to use AI there. And this is something that when I look at, for example, land use policy, not that much of AI could be used when we go for policy making. Okay, we can try to see whether this new tool could have some, let's say, implications in our work. But look, the nature of the work, I mean, policy making almost has nothing to do with AI. So trying to combine these two to say that, oh, I have a novel idea, to me is following the fashion. And here we are trying to be careful when we reject a paper, for example. This rejection, because, okay, this topic could be good, but whether it's a good, let's say, cup of tea for land use policy or not, that's something else. So you may have this published in some other journals because of this and that, but in this journal, not. But again and again, this, what I just tried to explain, from one editor to the other could be even different, because I am more to, let's say, pragmatic approach, no matter what tool is. If it is even very old traditional tool, let's go for it if it can really solve the issue, problem solver. But some other editors, they are again fan of new techniques and fashion it a lot. So this is something that I wanted to make it a little bit discussed and clear in our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. And Praveen?
Okay. Now, to your central question, Robin, what is hot, what is not? Land was hot, is hot, will remain hot. Centrality of land in well-being is something so central, so critical, so important. How do you manage land? How do you sort of ensure land rights? Yeah, there are a whole lot of questions which are absolutely critical. And then how do you manage it? So the whole question of sustainable use of land. You know, there are very good physics friends of mine who tell me these days that from the surface of the earth, almost 10 to 15 kilometers below it is like as if earth is suffering from cancer. Why has that happened? Precisely because we have messed up big way. You know, in terms of very aggressive chemicalization, which was found as a shorthand to ensure, let's say, quick increases in yield, etc. Massive chemicalization and so on and so forth. Now, so there are so many issues which come here. In fact, centrality of land is the centrality of well-being of humanity, right? And that is where, you know, water and the rest of it, all that comes in a big way, right? So on that, I have no doubts whatsoever. I mean, on that, you know, we have kind of quarreled with some of the biggest names who were supposed to be the kind of, let's say, in the Eurocentric literature, the dawns of what you would call the agrarian question. I'm talking of Henry Bernstein, I'm talking of Terry Byers, and the rest of them. We did a piece, Sam Moyo, myself, and Paris Yoras, in our journal, one of the opening issues of the journal, which was the agrarian question from the classical agrarian question, what does it mean, and how it was basically, in our point of view, messed up very seriously, not really paying adequate and due attention to Marx's more comprehensive treatment of it, and how it was reduced to a question of industrialization. That is exactly what Bernstein did. Yeah, that if you have enough capital, you forget about everything else. Capital can come from anywhere on the planet. Yeah, your agrarian question is solved. Absurd. That is, in fact, aggravating the agrarian question. So what models of industrialization do we need to have? Right? It can't be just any model of industrialization which messes up the ecology, which messes up the potential of sustainability, right? So all these issues have to be brought to the front burner in very profound ways, in very serious ways, with lots of, appropriate information, data, whatever you have, right? So that's one point which I would certainly sort of highlight, that this centrality, this hotness will never go away. It can go away only at the cost of imperiling our own lives, the life of planet Earth. Do we ever want that? Right? So that is the first question which I wanted to highlight. Second, neoliberalism or neoliberal capitalism is a complete disaster. We can't live with neoliberalism in any meaningful way, right? This is a model which is hell-bent on destroying everything. This kind of capitalism doesn't see beyond its nose, right? We have been talking about for decades now, for several decades now, about the tragedy of the commons. What about tragedy of the enclosures? You can have well-defined private property rights and mess up with everything that you have within your private property. Is that what we want? Right? So these are again issues which we have to confront in a far more serious fashion. And neoliberalism is the biggest disease of the time. Right? You have a handful of billionaires who now want to become whatever they want to become, all of us know. Yeah, they want to become the masters of this earth, right? Masters of the planet. In fact, Musk wants to now colonize Mars, right? He thinks that we can probably have a new planet to explore and so on. How realistic is that? Yes. So, any sort of engagement on the land question, on resource question, natural resources in general, has to be located in a framework where we are not talking of this extreme asymmetry of economic power as regards particular actors. And those who constitute the bottom half must have as much say as the top half. That is the only way forward from my point of view. Yes, bring in all technical knowledge, scientific knowledge to the table, right? I mean, that should never be neglected, for sure. I mean, we know, as per the FAO data, for instance, you have close to 1 billion people who are going hungry, right? We have close to 3.4 billion who are not getting nutritious food. No, they're not getting balanced diet, right? What have we done with this, with all our technology, all our science, all our knowledge? Yeah, is that where we wanted to reach? And this is where this asymmetry of economic power, this is where, the sort of entire planet basically being hijacked. These are the central concerns and questions that we need to absolutely engage with. And that's why, as I said earlier, land has to be visualized in a most comprehensive fashion. Yeah, along with a whole lot of other resources that we are talking about, along with a whole lot of management practices that are extremely important. We have had 30 COPs, right? Conference of parties and so on and so forth. Where have we landed on? Yeah. What is the situation today in terms of this whole business of what should be the time scale for ensuring that there is, we remain within that 1.5 degrees centigrade and so on. I mean, we literally are in a sort of intensive care unit on that count. And what are we doing? Nothing. Yeah. Each COP postpones it to the other COP. What have we gained from all these COPs? Right? Now, I think we need to get far more serious about these issues. I am utterly and deeply pessimistic on what is happening in the name of, managing resources, managing land, yeah, and so on. And that has been one of the primary concerns of the journal that I'm associated with. I mean, we have been saying this for the last decade and a half, right? So, Bernstein felt deeply unhappy with the approach that we adopt. But, we did not want to sort of quarrel with him just for fun. We thought his approach was completely on a, unidimensional track. This whole business of industrialization be the end, be the beginning, be the sole concern. No, we don't want that. Right? These are issues which one has engaged with now for a considerable period. So, I think there's a lot more that one can get into. But for the moment, what I certainly want to, and this is in response to what Juliana was flagging, sort of agrarian transformation, economic transformation, we need to go back to the basics. Go back to the letter that Marx wrote to Danielson in 1881. Yeah. And he's talking about how the kind of assault that we have unleashed, we are talking of 1881, or go to Marx's response to Vera Jesulich. Vera Jesulich had written this Russian sort of activist, had asked Marx, would it be possible to, in fact, bypass capitalism and move to socialism? Right? Marx, kind of somebody who had, in 1840s, who had gloated like a young man, almost, fantastically about the powers of capitalism, tells us, yes, indeed, why not? We don't have to have all the destruction for some potential, reconstruction at a later date. Why? Now, the kind of work that Hossein was also referring to with respect to Ostrom, for instance, comes at least in some ways close to some of these issues that Marx or late Marx, as usually many people are very fond of thinking of early Marx, middle Marx, late Marx, and so on. Yeah. Although I see a lot of continuity there, but we can have another conversation on that on some other occasion. So, to my mind, the biggest problem today is neoliberal capitalism, which is fundamentally a model of use and discard, throw away. Right? Kenneth Boulding had reminded us, 1957, what do we throw away? Where do we throw away? Planet Earth is like a spaceship. Where do we dump? The basic model of how to harness land and other natural resources is caught in a completely terrible groove. It is something which is keeping people hungry. It is something which is not facilitating nutritious food. What are we doing with all the science? Right? So, yes, I mean, I would certainly not agree at all with the Eurocentric kind of discourses on the land question, on the agrarian question, right? And we need to sort of, there's a lot of work. We need to build on that. We need to kind of nurture that further and have a conversation on an ongoing basis, yeah, on issues of governance, issues of ownership, issues of management, for sure. Juliana, did I answer even 1% of what you were bothered about?
Yes, thank you both for both of you. It's super interesting. A privilege to be here.
Thank you.
Right. Our planned time is beginning to draw towards an end. And nobody's currently got their hands up, but I'm speaking slowly now, just in case anybody would like to take the chance to make some final reflections before we all take leave of each other. I think there's something about the state of the world as it is today, which kind of affects everything and everybody, and I think has us all turning back to ask what's really important and kind of what on earth can we as individuals, whether as researchers or human beings, kind of what is it that we can do? What is it that's the appropriate thing to do? So I guess in the light of being in that climate, it's perhaps not surprising that the answers to the questions what's hot and what's not are extremely fundamental questions about what's really important rather than kind of what's the latest trend and latest fashion. So it feels like we've had well, both quite brilliant, but also very, very, very sobering and very relevant contributions and suggestions from both Hossein and Praveen. So thank you both very much for that. And if there's no final words or final reflections, then those will be our final words and reflections. Thank you both very much again for joining us. We'll incorporate you into our lists and keep you informed, and we hope to meet again. So thank you very much, everybody.
Sure.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much for this conversation, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wish we could continue another hour.
Thanks. Okay, Robin, so I'll take leave now. Okay?
Thanks, Praveen. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.